Hi, I'm Malessa Rambarran.
And I'm Candice Milano.
Welcome back to The Build Up, presented by Brown Harris Stevens, where we discuss the secrets of building wealth through real estate.
Today we'll be joined by Rich Perello, a former high school teacher turned luxury spec home builder out in the Hamptons, and we're going to hear about his journey from how he transitioned from education into real estate.
So today we're going to be talking about that headline that we both discussed prior to the episode. Baby boomers are back on top in the housing market.
So yes, they have unseated millennials who for a long time have been the biggest buyer demographic. But now we're seeing that 42% of home buyers and 50% of sellers are now of the baby boomer generation.
That's a big shift. Like you said, millennials were finally starting to gain some ground, but it looks like, just all of these high prices in the market is really pushing out millennials because it's really hard to afford buying a home right now.
Yes. I mean, we've talked a lot about the affordability crisis. And so right now, cash is king and the baby boomers have the funds, they have the liquidity and the equity to be competitive in the market. As we know, inventory is down. So they're the ones that are better equipped to move forward quickly. Obviously, if you're selling your home, you'd rather someone who's paying all cash than someone who needs to have a mortgage, which they don't have to wait to get their pre-approval letters. They can just make quick cash offers, which really puts millennials and now even Gen Zs at a big disadvantage. I
mean, we see that every day, right? When we're negotiating deals, oftentimes, buyers are coming in saying they're going to be all cash and they expect to have some sort of advantage, right? But let's talk about the implications. When older generations, they dominate the buying and the sell side, it shifts the whole ecosystem, right? So they're not just buying primary homes, they're buying second homes, they're buying retirement homes. And so that's really keeping all the power in their hands.
Definitely. It's very much a control game right now. And a lot of first-time home buyers, of the millennial generation or Gen Z even, they're feeling stuck on the sidelines because it's very intimidating to enter the market right now against, baby boomers who have, again, a lot more power and control in the process.
Yeah, and it's not really their fault though, right? They play the long game. And we often talk about that in real estate. You have to be able to play the long game. And they bought when interest rates were really low, so they were able to hold it. And they have their equity working for them.
Right. But we also have to be aware of what the current millennials and Gen Zs are facing that's really putting them also at a disadvantage is that they have much higher student loans than obviously baby boomers. Cost of living and inflation is much higher than it was, and it's continuing to go up. Interest rates also are, obviously at new peak highs. So there's a lot also working against the younger generation to be able to make these purchases.
100%. I mean, I saw somewhere about all the different kind of cycles that millennials have gone through, right? Whereas, baby boomers, they've been able to, like we said, just hold their real estate holdings and have that make money for them.
Right. So what we are seeing millennials and Gen Z and just in general younger generation doing right now is trying to get more creative with how they purchase. So they might be getting a cosign or they might be purchasing with a partner or with a friend. So there's other ways that they're looking to still enter the market in a more creative, less conventional way.
Well, that's a good thing, right? Like you kind of have to get creative in these times. What are you going to do? Just sit on the sideline and not buy a home? So it's great that we're out strategizing cash in that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, it may not look exactly like how your parents bought their first home, but maybe instead of a single family property, you're starting with an apartment or you're starting a little bit further out than your ideal location because it's more affordable. There's still ways to do it. It's just obviously maybe not the same path that you saw your parents take.
Right. And we kind of touched on that with our conversation with Rich. That was his advice is that you sort of have to just like buy maybe like we talked about multifamilies where you live on one floor, rent out the two. So kind of you have to get creative.
Yeah. The one thing that, home buyers should keep in mind right now is that sellers are looking for a smooth process. So if you're not able to afford all cash, at least come prepared with everything. Have your pre-approval ready, have your attorney lined up. Just present yourself as a complete package so that and obviously as competitive of an offer as you can, because that right now is also going to stand out versus someone who's taking a lot of time to kind of get everything organized.
I can see that. I mean, again, like when we're, representing buyers, that's something that we advise for sure. Just get all of your paperwork together, get your pre-approval, like you mentioned, so that way you can be really qualified, and sellers, they do take that into consideration, right? We've seen that also on the sell side. So again, I think anyone who's listening and reading these headlines, they should not be discouraged, right? There are different ways to get around it, and you have to align yourself with a proper team, like you mentioned, including attorneys, your brokers, your advisors, and that way, when you do find a property, even if you don't have the cash, right, you're coming in very prepared.
Right. I think the big takeaway here, like you said, is definitely don't be discouraged, but also wealth is not a race. I mean, especially when it comes to real estate, the first thing you learn if you're interested in buying a home or investing is that it's a long-term play. It's not a short-term return. So that's really key here is don't, compare yourself to the baby boomers who've had totally different circumstances that they've grown their wealth in, and obviously have had way longer in life to accumulate wealth. So, look at what you have and put together a strategic plan. And, that's hopefully what, they can take away from that.
Yeah, great advice.
This beautiful set here at Studio 1873 is brought to you by the Everset. The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. We work with Brown Harris Stevens and many other top real estate firms, staging their homes to sell quickly and at the highest price possible. Our staging is affordable without sacrificing quality or design. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
When we first started Excel Real Property Management 11 years ago, we did so with the intention of protecting the investment community. Here at Excel Real Property Management, we focus specifically on serving the needs of individual apartments, townhouse, and small multifamily building owners both in Manhattan and select neighborhoods of Brooklyn. Our services encompass everything: rent collection, expense payment, handling maintenance and repair, turnover between tenants, insurance needs. Literally anything that an investor would typically handle him or herself, we take care of for them. Whether you hold one individual apartment or a rental building that houses 20 units, Excel is here to help with all of your specific needs.
Rich, welcome to the Build Up.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Same here. Thank you so much for coming in today. We're especially happy to have you here and have an interesting conversation ahead for sure. But before we get into all of that, as Candice mentioned, you started your career as a high school biology teacher. So how did you get from there, education, to real estate?
So actually, my first job out of college was actually framing houses for about 6 months. I always wanted to learn how to build a house, even when I was in school. And I basically, after college, worked on a framing crew in Basking Ridge, New Jersey for about 6 months. Learned how to frame houses, decent size homes. And after doing that for about 6 months, I saved up a bunch of money. I actually moved out to Colorado for about a year to live in Boulder. I wanted to actually do my field, which was environmental science, biology. But when I got there, everyone from California was basically moving to Colorado, and I couldn't get a real job. So I ended up getting a job as a teacher back in New Jersey in the alternate program where you teach and get certified at the same time. So as a teacher, I always would do construction still in the summertime. And I basically bought I bought my first home in Montclair, New Jersey, which was like a 3-family home. We moved into the first floor, rented out the top 2 floors, and over the course of about 3 years, every summer I would work on my own house. My mother was a real estate agent. She would get me these small jobs in the summer to like renovate a bathroom, or I pretty much just just learned how to do everything myself, and I would practice on my own house is basically how I learned. And after about teaching for about 5 years, I ended up going from Jersey City to Mountain Lakes, New Jersey, where I was teaching, I was coaching. And after about 4 years of teaching, the classroom I was having a hard time in the classroom. I sort of saw myself changing and not being as motivated as I once was. I think I was a little less naive to it at that time about how money and wanting to make more money. And I went to college in Southampton, and I would still go to the Hamptons sometimes in the summer. And I ended up basically falling in love with surfing, of all things. A guy my size normally doesn't do very well in the ocean. My wife actually calls me Sasquatch of the Sea, is her nickname for me. And I wanted to try to move back out to the Hamptons and make a living out there. I had a really good friend who opened up a surf shop, and I sort of used that passion for wanting to surf to sort of navigate my way back out to the Hamptons, and construction was a perfect fit. So we put our house up for sale in Montclair, New Jersey. The timing was also good. I bought that house in the late 90s. So in the early 2000s, the market was, it was like doubling almost every year in the Hamptons, even in Montclair and in New York City. So we moved out to Southampton. I sold the house in Montclair. I used that money to buy a house in Southampton. And then one thing sort of just kind of rolled into another. There wasn't necessarily a master plan, but at the time, what I realized now, not understanding then, was how easy it was to get a mortgage. My wife, I basically got a mortgage. I'd get a mortgage in my name. I'd get a mortgage in my wife's name. We would buy a house, fix it up, and flip it. Then I moved on to buying vacant land, building a house. I would then move into the house, live in it for like 2 years, and then sell it. Like they called it like a builder's paradise, where you don't pay. You get a $500,000 tax credit or deduction for if it's your primary residence. So that's why you would live in it for 2 years. And then that kind of rolled into then having a construction company, which eventually rolled more into the design build concept of how I really started to work. And that was more of just being frustrated with dealing with customers and architects, sort of getting stuck in the middle, not having any real say when they're designing and planning the house. So that's kind of how that sort of evolved into wanting to be more involved with the actual decision making, which building a spec home, you're basically are the client and the customer, and you're trying to build it for someone that you don't necessarily know who it is, but you're trying to answer those questions like what would they want and how do you want it to look, and then that got into a whole other series of questions and things happening.
Right, that's quite the transition.
Yes.
So you started a construction company in the Hamptons, and from there, to go from just a construction company, not as much risk, right, to take on the risk of building spec homes, that must have been quite the decision. So can you walk us through like what inspired you? I know you touched on it a little bit before, but what was that process like?
I think it was just more of wanting to not have to answer to anyone.
Yeah,
was sort of the motivation for sort of creating your own mini economy, where I only really had to answer to the real estate market. That's really who I had to answer to. So I also like the idea of going to borrowing money, putting money in, financing, and I think that whole other end side of that business. And so I was able to. I did the first house I actually ever built. I took out a loan with my father. So since I wasn't teaching anymore, I didn't have constant income coming in. So it was hard for me to qualify for a loan. So my father was generous enough to sign for me. We took the loan out in his name. And that's sort of how I got, and I was still doing it as a primary residence. So that was a little bit easier, where we were planning on moving into it. And I did two of those. I was living in the second one when I met Richie Wolf, who is now my partner on the homes that we're doing currently. I met him through my brother, who was at the time working for the New York Yankees, and he became very good friends with Mitchell Modell, and he met Richie Wolf through Mitchell, and that's how I met him. And Richie, I don't know if did I mention this to you guys previously, that he's one of the founding members of Tao Group. So he was in, understand construction and the restaurant business, nightclub business, and he wanted to get into building houses in the Hamptons. So it was sort of just like a natural fit, where I believe it was like 2007 when we started our first project, and it was actually Richie Wolf, myself, and my brother were the three partners. We all put in a certain, I think it was a few $100,000 each, and then we used the money for the land to then borrow money from a bank. And that ended up being we ended up putting it on the market in September of 2008, which was right before the market crashed. So it was sort of a learning curve on how to deal with that. But luckily, we designed a house that was very unique, which I think is there's a reason why we were able to still sell it. We sold it in April of 2009. We still made $1 million. We didn't lose money. And I think because it was a unique build and how it was designed, it was like a modern Tuscan estate is what we called it. So it was a stucco house, which was different than your typical shingle Hamptons home. But I think that's why we were still able to sell it, because there was really no competition for that style home. And that's sort of how that relationship started.
That's great. And that's a pretty interesting first introduction to this new partnership that you just formed, and your timing, which is something that we talk about a lot with developers. It's all about timing, is right before, a major financial crisis in the country. Yes. So you mentioned that it was a learning curve, and I think that's something that we can all still learn a lot from today. Obviously, today was another tough day in the market. So, and that's going to continue to happen. And so what's really appealing about development is obviously where there's great risk, there's great reward, but the timing is really such a key factor. So what did you learn from that process that you now implement in your approach to development to try to maintain a product that's a little bit more market, resistant?
Well, I think that what I really learned was that you have to be flexible. You can't have like this straight, like this is what we're going to build. This is when it's going to be done. This is how much we're going to sell. I mean, you plan all of that, but stuff happens, and you have to learn how to sort of adapt. One of the unique things of the Hamptons market is if you can't sell it, you could still rent it. And sometimes you basically just have to survive until the market comes back, which I know I've been through two of those now, where the market dipped, and as long as you were able to survive that and get through that, then the market comes back, and maybe you don't sell it initially. Maybe you rent it for a year or 2 years, which I've done on a project where we ended up renting it because we couldn't get our number. And I think what I do now is I basically do everything. So we're currently building 2 houses in North Haven, which is this like little enclave in Sag Harbor. And so we are actually building the homes. They're fully developed renderings. We also do a furniture plan. We do all of those designs are actual, the furniture plans in the renderings. So when we go to sell the house, we sell it with the option, if you want to buy this furniture that was designed for this house, you can. It's one package. And if you get to the point where maybe you don't sell the house, then I would end up buying the furniture, furnish the entire house, and then we would rent it if we had to. Right. And at least you're still making the house more appealing for buyers to walk through. I mean, when a house is staged, it's completely different. And I think that's how you really get the most bang for your buck, or you make the most amount of money with the same amount of effort, because you go through so much time and energy designing the house, building the house, getting your permits, and all of the hurdles that you go through to get to that point where you really want to take advantage of what you've created, and not just, you want to make the most profit that you possibly can. And I feel like staging it is one way to really do that. And then it also gives you the option, if you can't sell it, you can rent it.
Exactly. I mean, you're speaking our language, right? We work with a lot of developers, so oftentimes a lot of buyers, they come in and they can't envision the space, right? So staging has been really instrumental in our business, and we always recommend it. So we're really aligned in that sort of process. But going back to the whole design, right? Your firm is a true design build company, and you've worked with the same architect, I think, for about 8 projects, right?
Correct.
So what are the advantages of that? So you have that consistency, right? So what does that bring to the table?
So I started working with Mike Hill. I believe it was 2017 was the first project we did together. And I met him through Richie Wolf. Mike used to work at Rockwell, and Rockwell did all of the design for Tao. So that's how Richie Wolf met him. And he very quickly realized his talent. So Mike and I did our first project, and we hit it off. We basically understood, we had the similar aesthetic. We were 90% of the time we were on the same page. And I think we really complemented each other, because Mike would be designing something, and he may have this really cool idea on something he wants to have it to look, or he comes up with this concept, but he may not necessarily know how to build it, or how to build it economically, where it's not going to cost a fortune. So it was that synergy between the two of us, that we taking his design, but then also implementing it in a way where, it may look really expensive, but we found a way to do it that was maybe much more efficient, or also spending money in the right places. I think that the longer I'm in this business, the more I really understand where you're going to get your money back, and where you need to spend money, and where some areas that you don't need to spend, or you're not going to get that money back.
Now that you've gone through the process many times, where are you finding the most value in the design and the build process?
So a couple areas where would be obviously the kitchen, the common living areas, maybe the living room that we basically are designing a resort. A family resort is essentially what we're building, where these families can come out and they can spend, a month in August in there, and they don't have to, if they don't want to leave the house, they don't have to leave the house. So I think it's that style of how these people are going to live. They're typically on vacation. They're not living there every day. It's not their primary residence. So things that we like to focus on is the outdoors, the pool, a hot tub, an outdoor eating area, outdoor fireplace, where you have all these moments that you can be entertaining, or you're in your resort, and basically you're on vacation. So I like to spend a lot of money on the outdoor spaces. I think the pool area, and then you're going to spend money in the master bathroom, in the master bedroom. I think the guest bedrooms aren't as important. Same thing with those bathrooms. A lot of times
we'll get them to leave as possible.
Yes. Or you're. In terms of I used to do a different bath tile for every single bathroom, and you go and you have like 9 bathrooms. Where now we probably pick a unique one for the master, for the junior master, maybe like a spa bath in the basement. But then like the 3 other guest baths, we'll do the same thing. I don't think that that's as important. And then that's areas where you can save some money and put that money somewhere else. So it's sort of that balancing act of still trying to predict who's going to buy it and what they're going to want. And then obviously you're never, when they end up buying it, they're going to make changes. So there's also other things that you don't want to do where you don't want to commit to a level that's so specific that then you're only got one person or a handful of people that would really buy that house. So that's hard to juggle that.
One other question about, you mentioned before that you're building 2 homes currently. You have 2 that are in, completed design process. So when it comes to these spec homes, from our understanding, it's not a quantity business, it's more of a quality business. But how do you approach that while still scaling and growing profitability when you're only focused on such a few amount of properties per year?
That's a good question. I think that you want to... still the most important thing still is location. That is the most, and when you're developing these projects, you want to develop a project where there's no buts, where people aren't going to come in like, oh, I love the house, but and there's things that you can't change. So I still think the location is the most important aspect of when you're developing these homes. And in terms of scalability, like right now, the 2 houses we're doing are only about a mile apart from each other. So that certainly helps in building some efficiencies of being able to have your subs working on several projects at the same time, where maybe you can get a little bit of a discount because it's a little more economical for them to go from one project right to the next. And then in terms of scaling, I think really the next move is where you're buying properties that maybe you can subdivide, or you're buying several lots in one location, where then when you come in and you start building these homes and increasing the value, you're sort of doing that to all of your properties. So that's one way to try to scale. But I don't think I'm necessarily. It's more about looking for the right location is really where I start.
That's great. It's the same way here in the city, and it's super hard here, of course. But going back to something that you mentioned, when you first started, you talked about your first project, and it was very difficult, right? But that had to do with more timing. But looking back now, what would you say was one of the most challenging, hurdle that you had to overcome, and what was that like?
The most challenging hurdle. Maybe doing all that and raising 4 kids at the same time was probably.
Yes.
I have a saint for a wife, so that always helps.
For sure.
But I think it's just managing your time and still being able to enjoy. I mean, I love what I do, but there are days that I don't feel like going to work like anybody else. So I would say, I think the hardest thing to do when you get into this level is to not overbuild your location. And it's very easy to do. And I see a lot of spec home builders doing that, where they won't spend enough on the land and then they'll build this monstrosity, or build this beautiful house. But, there's power lines 2 blocks away from where you're building. So that's going to cap out what you're going to get for that house. So I think really knowing, sort of working backwards and what's the maximum you can get for this house in this neighborhood, and then sort of working your way back from there on how much money you spend to build it. So you don't overbuild, and you could still price it at a reasonable price where it will move, because ultimately you also do want to sell it as quickly as you can. Ideally, we try to sell them before they're done. Which there was a time, I'd say recently, where that was happening more often, but I feel like now that they're sort of moving away from that a little bit. But I would say don't overbuild is it's hard not to, because you just do one thing, and then all of a sudden everything adds up, and you're like, oh my God, we're $1 million over budget. And then you're like, well, we'll just raise the house $1 million. But that doesn't always work.
Yes, we couldn't agree more, because as the agents, we're being told, well, you have to sell it for this price, and that's not how the market works, unfortunately. So great piece of advice. Have you found any parallels between your teaching career and now in real estate development, or any transferable skills between those two sides of your life?
I guess just being organized. I mean, when I remember as a teacher, if you're not organized, the kids pick up on that really fast, and they'll take advantage of you very quickly. And I think in construction, it really is about being organized and understanding what the steps are for what you're doing, and really thinking ahead of what the potential issues could be, and then trying to deal with those before they happen, or at least when they do happen, knowing what to do and how to mitigate that as best as you can.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll leave you with one last question, which is, a lot of our listeners are just trying to get started into real estate investing and development. You shared your journey of how you went from, doing some construction side jobs into buying your first property, and how that evolved into what you have today. But for those out there who are looking to get their start, do you have some general advice for those, how they can really get into development and into real estate investing?
Well, I mean, I think if you're in your 20s and you're starting out, buy a multifamily home, or buy something that generates income right away, so that you actually can start building that equity and live in the house, or maybe you live in a 3-bedroom house, rent out 2 bedrooms or when you go to buy, if you're looking to buy something, renting is really how you are able to pull that money out of the house and maybe afford something that you normally couldn't. So I think you got to just be open to that and looking for those opportunities where maybe the sales market in that area might not be great, but the rental market is strong, and you can kind of take advantage of that to get your feet wet. I would say the Hamptons market is much different than that.
Don't start there.
But I think that just being creative with buying properties that generate income will certainly help you if you don't necessarily have a lot of money to start out with.
I like that advice, because that's a big issue that a lot of people have, is they don't have the capital to get started. So that's a great way to enter, even if that's not your end goal. You want to end up building luxury spec homes like you did. That's not where you started, and people have to understand that we all start somewhere, and even if that's not where.
Yes, I have people now they're like, wow, you're very successful, and they think it happened overnight. I'm like, well, this is about 25 years of flipping houses to get to this point. And I think it's also having that focus where you're working on the same thing over and over again for a long period of time, and over eventually that does come to fruition where you could see the result of what you've been doing for several years.
We feel the same with our journey as well, right? It's about that consistency and just day over day, and especially because we're all fighting against market cycles that we don't control. So, it's not linear growth in real estate, but if you do it long enough, and you're patient, you should see some really great results like you have. So thank you so much for sharing all of your insight with us, for joining us today. We really enjoyed this.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much, Rich.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Stephen Bailey from Roadway Moving and Storage. As an official moving partner of Brown Harris Stevens, we know that your clients deserve more than just a move. At Roadway Moving and Storage, we turn moving into an experience they will love. From specialized services to a white glove treatment, we've got it all covered. When you choose Roadway, you're choosing a peace of mind for your clients. Plus, our referral program is the most rewarding in the industry. Want to learn more? Shoot me an email at steven@roadwaymoving.com or visit roadwaymoving.com.
Do you have a big move coming up? I'm Scott Nadler with Cross Country Mortgage, and I've got the loan to match your dream home. Whether it's your first or your fifth, I'll make the process quick and easy. Call me today. Let's make it happen.
Today's conversation with Rich was filled with so many great insights, from how he transitioned from education to real estate, the power of the relationships that he's built with his investors and his team overall, and the importance of smart design that really will get you the return you're looking for. All are really great, valuable pieces of advice that we took away from today.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode with Rich. If you found this conversation helpful, feel free to subscribe and leave us a review.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice.
For specific recommendations, please consult with your financial, legal, or tax professional.
Phone or always leaves your text on red? Leave your text on red.
Built a court with $1,000 loan.
Tell us a little bit about how you actually came from.
Welcome to the build-up, John Rowan.
Thanks for having me.
We're coming to you here from Studio 1873.
It's about 57% over.
70 million. So then, cheers.